Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today's lecture is not intended to criticize or defend any particular politician or political movement. Instead, our purpose is to examine how profound political and economic changes within a nation can shape society and influence human psychology. Throughout this lecture, we will compare insights from economics, criminal psychology, political psychology, international relations, organizational behavior, Eastern philosophy, and the Tibetan Buddhist concept of the Bardo. By bringing these different perspectives together, we hope to explore how power, ideology, and human decision-making may influence the future of a society. The psychological interpretations and philosophical perspectives presented in this lecture should be understood as analytical frameworks rather than established facts or definitive conclusions. I encourage you to consider multiple viewpoints, examine additional sources, and reach your own conclusions. Our discussion will focus particularly on how structural changes within a nation may affect investor confidence, economic behavior, social trust, and the long-term stability of a society. We will also explore how leaders make decisions under pressure, how groupthink develops within centers of power, and how human beings respond psychologically during periods of crisis. Through historical examples and philosophical insight, my hope is that this lecture will become more than a discussion of current political events. Rather, I hope it encourages a deeper, intellectual exploration of human psychology, political power, and the systems that shape civilizations. If you find this lecture valuable, please consider subscribing, giving the video a like, and sharing it with others. Your support allows us to continue producing thoughtful and in-depth educational content, and your sharing helps broaden meaningful discussion. Now let us begin with the central question of today's lecture. Imagine a national leader who remains firmly committed to pro-labor and anti-business policies, even as many observers argue that the country's economic system is approaching a period of severe instability. What psychological environment might such a leader be experiencing? As a human being, does such a leader privately regret earlier decisions? Or might the leader now be quietly considering a dramatic shift toward more business-friendly policies in an effort to stabilize the economy? If such a policy reversal never occurs, what psychological mechanisms might prevent it? Some public discussions speculate that a leader could be constrained by past misconduct or personal vulnerabilities. Others suggest that close advisors, ideological allies, or powerful political networks may reinforce existing beliefs so strongly that meaningful change becomes extremely difficult. Today, we will examine these questions through several analytical lenses, including criminal psychology, political group dynamics, international relations, the Tibetan Buddhist concept of the Bardo, found in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, and classical Eastern philosophy. Together, let us explore one of the deepest dimensions of human psychology. Is it regret or cognitive dissonance? Many people naturally assume that when a nation experiences severe economic decline or political crisis, its leader must suffer sleepless nights filled with regret. After all, if businesses are closing, investment is disappearing, and jobs are being lost, how could any responsible leader remain emotionally unaffected? However, research in criminal psychology and the psychology of power suggests that reality may often be more complicated. One influential concept is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance refers to the psychological discomfort that occurs when deeply held beliefs collide with undeniable evidence. Imagine a leader who sincerely believes that aggressive redistribution, stronger labor protections, and increased pressure on large corporations will inevitably produce a more just society. Suppose that instead capital begins leaving the country, investment declines, unemployment rises, and entrepreneurs increasingly seek opportunities abroad. At that point, an uncomfortable question naturally emerges. What if my fundamental assumptions were wrong? For many individuals, acknowledging such a possibility would require reassessing years or even decades of personal convictions and political identity. Psychological defense mechanisms often emerge, precisely to avoid that painful confrontation. Rather than concluding that previous policies were mistaken, A leader may instead reinterpret events in ways that preserve existing beliefs. Economic decline may be attributed to sabotage by powerful financial interests. Capital flight may be viewed as deliberate political resistance. External criticism may be interpreted as coordinated attempts to undermine reform. Whether these interpretations are objectively correct or not is less important than understanding the psychological function they serve. As institutional stress increases, the desire for greater control may also intensify. This can create a self-reinforcing cycle in which attempts to solve problems through increased control generate additional instability, leading to even stronger demands for control. Could personal vulnerabilities prevent policy change? Another provocative question often appears in public debate. Could a leader become unable to change direction because of past misconduct, scandals, or personal vulnerabilities? Certainly throughout history, political scandals and legal liabilities have sometimes limited the freedom of national leaders. Yet criminal psychology suggests that the most powerful restraints are not always external. Sometimes the strongest prison exists within the individual's own mind. Studies of offenders displaying strong antisocial or narcissistic personality traits reveal an interesting pattern. Even actions that violate laws or harm others are frequently reframed as necessary sacrifices for a higher cause, historical mission, or moral objective. If a leader possesses such psychological tendencies, previous wrongdoing may no longer appear shameful. Instead, it may become reinterpreted as evidence of persecution by an unjust establishment, or as the unavoidable price of pursuing a noble vision. Consequently, criticism does not necessarily weaken conviction. It may instead reinforce it. The leader increasingly perceives opponents not as legitimate critics, but as hostile enemies, determined to destroy a righteous cause. Under these conditions, abandoning previous policies becomes psychologically far more difficult than simply changing economic strategy. It would require admitting that years of sacrifice, political struggle, and perhaps ethically questionable decisions had not served a noble mission after all. For some personalities, such an admission represents a psychological threat, greater than continued policy failure. As a result, accelerating toward crisis may paradoxically become easier than reversing course. The psychology of power and groupthink. Let us now move beyond the psychology of the individual and examine the broader structure surrounding political leadership. One of the most influential concepts in political psychology is groupthink, introduced by Irving Janis. National leaders rarely make decisions in complete isolation. Around every center of power exists a network of advisors, political allies, ideological supporters, and institutional insiders. Over time, these surrounding individuals can become an emotional filter through which all information must pass. Ironically, those closest to the leader may sometimes become even more ideologically committed than the leader. Their careers, influence, and political futures often depend upon preserving the existing direction. If the leader begins considering a significant policy shift, trusted advisors may respond with warnings. If we compromise now, we betray our supporters. Changing direction would mean political collapse. Such messages reinforce fear while discouraging independent evaluation. Eventually, an environment of groupthink may emerge. External warnings about declining investment, financial instability, or weakening international confidence are dismissed as politically motivated attacks to preserve internal unity outside. Critics are increasingly portrayed as enemies. Within such a closed, decision-making environment, the leader may gradually come to view himself or herself as the final defender of the nation against hostile external forces. The stronger this emotional and ideological reinforcement becomes, the more difficult genuine policy reconsideration may become. Ancient Eastern wisdom and self-created disaster. How did the great thinkers of the ancient East understand this pattern? Remarkably, many classical texts warned about similar psychological dangers. Thousands of years ago, one famous passage from the ancient Chinese classic, the Book of Documents, states, "Calamities sent by heaven may yet be avoided. calamities created by oneself cannot. The idea is profound. Natural disasters and external threats can often be overcome through wisdom, preparation, and cooperation. But disasters created through human arrogance, poor judgment, or moral blindness become far more difficult to escape. From this perspective, the collapse of institutions or economic systems is not always caused by fate or foreign enemies. Sometimes it results from decisions made within the system itself. Classical Eastern philosophy teaches that enduring stability comes from acting in harmony with the natural order, rather than attempting to dominate it through excessive pride. Similar ideas appear in Mencius, where wise leadership is associated with moral self-reflection, humility, and respect for the larger principles governing society. A leader consumed by excessive confidence may gradually lose the ability to distinguish between conviction and reality. The belief that one can completely reshape markets, control complex societies, or permanently override fundamental economic forces may become a form of hubris. The tragedy, according to these ancient traditions, is that those who create their own downfall often remain convinced that someone else is responsible. In psychological and philosophical terms, this represents one of the deepest forms of self-deception, a condition in which the individual can no longer recognize the difference between reality and the story the mind has constructed.